say.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you for waiting so patiently for Tariq, who had come all the way from KL. Okay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. Tariq Ismail, as you have read from the introduction on MHHC, is the eldest grandson of the late Tun Dr Ismail. He's a businessman who's involved in the agricultural sector and media. Recently, he has voiced out against the racial and religious extremism in Malaysia. Now, I'd like to call upon Tariq to give his talk about his late grandfather. Thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to apologize for me being late, as KL's traffic is still madness. But thank you everyone for coming in tonight in support of my talk. It's my first talk regarding my grandfather. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Tan for organizing this and the Daily Things Cafe for playing host to my talk. Let us start with the quote from my grandfather. Why do we fight for Merdeka? So that the different races can be divided? That can't be the way, right? That can't be why all these great Malay and UMNO leaders fought for this. Something is wrong. I hope the new discussions will start. Why are we building Malaysia? What Malaysia are we building? And what kind of symbol Malaysia is supposed to be? When I first started this piece, it actually resonated as what we had before during the time of independence is what's happening now. And I think Malaysians are at a crossroads. Things are happening so fast, many questions are being asked, there are just no answers. And what we have is, we know what is wrong. But there are some people out there who think wrong is right, but wrong is just plain wrong. And when we tell them that, we get shut off. And what needs to come out now is, I think this message needs to resonate through all Malaysians. In the media, in social media, amongst peers, especially at home. Wrong is wrong. And we need to emphasize that. But what we can do is, we can learn from history. You know, we can learn from the past and correct them. When, we evaluate the wrongs so it becomes the right. The pillars of a just society has been put into place. And it's placed within our constitution. It's there, and if we were to chip at it, that chip will be a big hole. That big hole will suddenly turn into a pillar falling. And that pillar falling will cause a domino effect. And everything what we built upon will be lost. Tun Dr Ismail is not just a person. He is an institution in which the ethos of Malaysia firmly sits on. He's a father figure, a statesman, principled, ethical, compassionate. All these are attributes of a man that took us out of the fire of 1969. Thus, I would like to point out 4 points about Tun Dr Ismail today. Let's talk about his upbringing. What forged the man that transcended race and religion? His days in UMNO, 1969, and how we can learn from his time to fix Malaysia today. I've never met my grandfather, as I was born 6 years after he passed away. But ever since young, the aura of Tun Dr Ismail was there, and it formed some sort of a pillar for us. I mean, we were told, don't lie, don't talk nonsense. If we lie, we get chili in the mouth. If we do something wrong, we get punished. That's a warning first, and then after that, the belt, so on and so on and so on. But let me ask you, each and one of you, when I mention the word Tun Dr Ismail, what comes out? No? There you go. Nowadays, when you ask about Tun Dr Ismail, the first thing is Anakun. So I don't blame him. Somehow or other, the history books don't see that. Do you go to school? But the thing is, what's most important about Tun Dr Ismail was his upbringing. He was born November 4th, 1915, and he was born into an aristocratic family. I must stress that his maternal grandfather, Haji Muhammad Saleh, was a Chinese convert to Islam and was a state legislative treasurer of Johor under Sultan Sir Abu Bakr. His father was a statesman who later became the first Speaker of the Dewan Negara and the first chairman of Malayan banking upon independence. Hence, statesmanship is in his blood. Here is a quote from my late grandfather. I am convinced that this early mingling with the other races during the most impressionable stage of my life had a lot to do with my non-racial outlook. Since young, Tun Dr Ismail found himself gravitated towards Chinese girls. And this was because the Chinese had more freedom to mingle than the Malay counterparts. And one particular Chinese girl that he particularly was fond of is Eileen Chua. Eileen Chua eventually married Robert Kwok. So the history was there since very, very young. In Australia, when he was studying medicine, his worldview was further enhanced. And I would like to quote my uncle Tawfiq here. He was on his own and a member of a minority there. He didn't have other Malays to prop him up. And he had a sense of loneliness. He felt that he was treated as an equal and that this was the way he would want to treat other people as well. So Australia further cemented his view of the world and of himself. And he observed that Australians, especially the women, would always exercise. And he thought, oh, why can't Malay girls exercise? But then he later relented and said, he said, the girls and women of my life in the kampong did not have to exercise. They spent their waking hours hauling water and firewood, as well as pulling the paddy fields. So he realized back then that even though what he saw that the Malay girls should be was wrong, because he was an aristocrat, he was detached from typical Malay society in which the girls would go out there and work. But this is during his formative years, is how the statesman was born. Upon returning from Australia, Tun Dr Ismail was thrust into politics as his family was already embroiled in the fight for independence. Upon the foundation of the Federation of Malaya, he was appointed by Dr. On Jaafar into the State Legislative Council of Johor. At the same time, Dr. On offered Tun Dr Ismail a seat on the Federal Legislative Council, but it came with a price. He had to join UMNO. Interestingly, my grandfather did not join UMNO. He will only join UMNO if UMNO were to fight for independence. But back in the State Legislative Assembly, he said, no, UMNO was wrong, because what UMNO was advocating was against the Johor State Constitution. Another quote from him said, it was impossible to influence people to support the independence movement merely by writing articles, because time was against it. And in any case, all the newspapers that enjoyed a wide circulation were not anxious to do the wrong thing against the government in power. It was also impractical for the intellectuals to form their own party, because such a party would not get mass support. The only alternative was to join a political party that already had mass support and which would be directed to fight for the independence of the country. He didn't join UMNO, he actually formed the Malay Graduates Association, political discussion group. So here is a man that back then was trying to struggle. He knew that we needed to move forward. And he knew in a way that maybe UMNO was not the way, but he had to somehow talk about it, have discussions. How do we move forward? It was not until 1951 that Tun Dr Ismail joined UMNO. And it was by chance. In 1950, Tun Dr Ismail married my late grandmother, Nourish Kinsett. And on the way to the honeymoon, they met Tun Dr Rahman in Kuala Lumpur, who invited them to have a dance. And upon learning that Tun Dr Ismail and my late grandmother were newlyweds, ushered them back home and said, the dance floor is where no man should be. You should be in bed enjoying your honeymoon. But it was because of Tun Dr Ismail and the Malay Graduate Association that Tun Dr Rahman eventually became the president of UMNO. And in 1951, my grandfather decided to join UMNO, and he was then elected vice president. Interestingly enough, Dr. On and Tun Dr Ismail clashed prior to Dr. On setting up the Independence for Malaya Party, as Dr. On had made very communal attacks against the Chinese. In fact, early in his political career, Tun Dr Ismail was a man who found compromise, especially when one faction was at loggerheads with another. For example, in 1954, the alliance of UMNO and MCA decided to boycott the British-backed local elections. And there was a meeting between the British High Commissioner and Donald McGillivray, Tun H.S. Lee, and Tun Ismail. In fact, Tun Dr Ismail proposed that the alliance would support the elections, but only if the High Commissioner could consult with the party that won the elections before making any appointments. The High Commissioner initially refused, but after finding out that public opinion was against him, he backed down. Another example of fairness, prior to independence, Tun Dr Ismail accused the UMNO right wing of acting in an imperialistic manner towards the Chinese. Tun Dr Ismail was a strong proponent of the Razak report, and it was the Malay ultras that felt that the Chinese had to speak Malay. They could not speak Chinese, the Indians could not speak Indian, everyone had to speak Malay. But Tun Dr Ismail said, look, if the Chinese and the Indians who came here without any intention, in fact they were forced to come here, and if they accepted that Malay was a national language, then they should be granted citizenship. He had this to say: under colonial rule, there was a cumulative increase in the population of immigrant races, especially those of Chinese origin, and to a lesser extent, the Indians. The latter brought in mainly to work in the rubber estates owned by the British. No attempt was made to make these immigrants loyal citizens of Malaya. The British were content to see that so long as they obeyed the laws of the country, they could come and leave as they pleased. As a result of this policy, when more and more of them settled in Malaya, the result was an increasing number of aliens in the country who, on the whole, were richer and more vigorous than the Malays. When the Malays seized political power after the Second World War, their main defense against the more virile and richer neighbors was to deny them the right of citizenship. It was this that the social contract was born. However, many years later, Tun Dr Ismail did propose for a union of the alliance. He wanted to merge MCA, MIC, and UMNO under one multi-ethnic party. After independence, in 1957, Tun Dr Ismail was posted as Malaya's first ambassador to the United States of America. The first act of Malaya's independence, he walked into the United Nations United Nations Assembly Hall, and he carried a weapon. It's the first time a person ever carried a weapon into the UN Assembly Hall. He always advocated that Malaya should always remain independent and neutral, and that the nation's stand should not be dictated by other countries' policies. In fact, in 1959, as the Minister of External Affairs, the Tunku had stated that Malaya would have to eventually recognize the Communist People's Republic of China, which was in contradiction to what Tun Dr Ismail said. Tun Dr Ismail said that as long as the People's Republic of China backed the Malayan Communist Party, Malaysia should not recognize it. Tunku's statement infuriated Tun Dr Ismail. In fact, he wanted to resign 3 times, and one of the examples of him trying to resign was he actually went to Tunku's house in Bukit Tunku, and back then it was called Maxwell Hill. Knocked on the door, demanded that Tunku accept his resignation, but Tunku wasn't there. So he waited for 2 hours. In actual fact, Tunku was actually in his cupboard, hiding, and actually told the butler that, look, after Tun Dr Ismail calmed down, let him leave. And eventually, after 2 hours later, Tun Dr Ismail calmed down, left, and the whole episode was quickly forgotten. In 1962, Tun Dr Ismail was appointed as the Home Affairs Minister. One of his roles was to imprison people under the ISA. And we all know what the ISA is about, detention without trial. And back then we had this communist insurgency. My mother related to me a very interesting story. Whilst having breakfast, a Chinese lady came to the house with a bag of vegetables. And my grandfather asked, "What's that?" She opened up the bag, showed the vegetables. Tun Dr Ismail just said, "Okay, let me guess, your son's in prison." And she said, "Yes." "Pack up your bags, okay, put the vegetables back in, please leave. I can't entertain you." So back then, even a piece of vegetable was considered a form of corruption. I mean, how many people do we know today we give them a piece of vegetable and they're not going to take it, let alone money? In 1963, Sarawak, Sabah, and Singapore joined Malaya to form Malaysia, in which Indonesia under Sukarno was dead against. That was the period of confrontation. So at the UN General Assembly, Tun Dr Ismail was up to his same antics, snuck in some more weapons, and proved to the UN Legislative Council that said, look, these are the weapons that Malaysia confiscated as part of confrontation from the Indonesians. It was also the same time during which Tun Dr Ismail and Lee Kuan Yew clashed. And it was over the Malaysians for Malaya policy. Lee Kuan Yew had formed a coalition called the Malaysian Solidarity Council to oppose Article 153, in which today is still the most controversial and sensitive of all the articles in our federal constitution. Back then, some right-wingers viewed that the slogan was an insult to Malay sovereignty, and that the presence of the Chinese and Indians are a privilege accorded to them. Tun Dr Ismail and Tun Dr Abdul Rahman, the more moderate of all the UMNO factions, viewed that this would cause trouble later down the line, as the Malays were not yet ready back then to compete with the other races. But Tun Dr Ismail understood the Malay psyche. They were hard on them, but yet delicate. Thus, it was then agreed that Singapore had to be kicked out of Malaysia, and the rest, we can say, is history. But interestingly enough, when I read the first edition of Lee Kuan Yew's autobiography, he had high respect for Tun Dr Ismail as the only man in Malaysia he can trust and work with. There's 2 instances. One instance was golf. Apparently, Tun Dr Ismail never cheated on golf. So, and Lee Kuan Yew said you can tell a lot about people when they play golf. And everyone else cheated, apparently, according to Lee Kuan Yew. Another episode was, and I would like to quote Ling Ketsiang on this blog, Lee was expounding in his usual erudite and logical manner on a particular issue. At the end, he asked Ismail what he thought about it. And Tun Dr Ismail replied, "I disagree." Flabbergasted, Lee asked Ismail for his reasons. At which point, Ismail remarked that since Lee had so brilliantly enumerated all the salient points, there was nothing for him to add. So, Tun Dr Ismail, from that time went on, and really reflected supreme self-confidence. He actually out-lawyered the lawyer, Lee Kuan Yew. But in 1967, he resigned from all government posts, citing health reasons, and became the chairman of Guthrie. Tunku Rizali once lamented, "The Chinese did not have much confidence in Razak, but they did in Ismail. Razak was always associated with Malay and rural affairs, etc. Ismail was a principled man, and was seen that way by the different races. He was the Rock of Gibraltar. Once he decided on something, you could be sure that he had gone through the relevant details and studied them. What is confidence unless it is based on the people's belief in the leader?" So, during 1969, on May 13th, Tun Dr Ismail was actually on the way back from Penang, if I'm not mistaken. And next to him was my mother. And he asked my mother, should I stay in business or should I go back into politics? My mother asked, what's the difference? Well, in politics, we won't go on holidays. In business, we would have enough money. So my mother went up to him and said, follow your conscience, you know what you need to do. Quickly he went back home, told my late grandmother that, okay, I'm joining Tun Razak's team. The country needs me. And he had with him, for the first 24 hours, a revolver. But it can also be argued that without exemplary leadership of Malaysia's twin towers of power of the late 60s and early 70s, Tun Mahathir would never have had the platform to launch Vision 2020 and to drive Malaysia to become a first world nation. With the fires of May 13th still burning and the smoke not having subsided, Malaysia then could succumb to what many developing nations in the 60s succumbed to. Under the rule of the military junta, which would in fact have turned Malaysia into a banana republic. However, under the guidance of Tun Dr Ismail, Tun Razak, and General Tun Ibrahim, they did not seek martial law, but instead formed the National Operations Council. And this was a time when UMNO and their right-wingers were advocating Malay supremacy. And they used PAS as a means to incite the ultra-conservative religious Malays against DAP, MCA, and Gerakan. Tun Dr Ismail would never have been successful unless he had the respect and the trust of Tun Razak and Tunku. In fact, it was that cohesive relationship that allowed their rule to be unchallenged. And it was evident that the Malay right-wing factions within UMNO, such as Tun Mahathir and Tun Muhsin Hitam, were silenced. Had the both of them not instilled the confidence back into the public, Razak with the rural Malays, Ismail with the Chinese and the Indians, the ultras would have had their way, and Malaysia as we know it now wouldn't exist. The causes of May 13 will always be controversial, will always be debated, and frankly, we will never find the truth out of it. But what we can do is reflect back on what had happened, what's happening now. I mean, just only a few weeks ago, actually just a week ago, okay, there was an incident of just sheer utter madness and stupidity. I mean, this is what Malaysia is coming to. Are we marking our own territory with violence and barking mad statements? Everyone is misquoting each other. Ministers are contradicting each other. Leadership is absent. But this was, I think, what happened back then in 1969. Only one difference. Back then, there was no social media. There was no TV. There was no media whatsoever. So people relied on the word of mouth. And it was easier to contain back then. But back then, my grandfather decided to introduce a legislation to halt rumour mongering. And as rumour mongering would have been detrimental to the rule of law. For instance, and this is a very true story, my mother had come back from an outing and said, oh, this is what someone else is saying to me. And he told my mother, don't say that. You do not know if it's true or not. If you want my daughter, and I hear you the second time, you spread something like this, I'll put you in jail. He was that strict. There was no difference between a family member and to the right yet. It was all about fairness. Whilst he was strict, he was never seen to be a dictator. There was no complaints of abuse of power. And he was determined that this philosophy be instilled in the Ministry of Home Affairs. For example, timing is everything to Tun Dr Ismail. At one time, a police outrider was late for about 2 minutes. So it messed up his timing. What Tun Dr Ismail said, look, go home, I'm not going to fire you, but you're not fit to be a police outrider. I had to leave at this time. You're late. But back then, we also had to realize that Southeast Asia during the 60s was at a boiling point. There was communist influence from Vietnam, Thailand, the communist insurgencies. And Malaysia was at the forefront of it. But if we hadn't had strong leaders like Tun Dr Ismail, Tun Razak, we would have fallen to communism. But however, today, what we are seeing is, we're seeing neo-colonialist powers bearing fruit. They are paying for religious schools who don't even report to the Ministry of Education. They're breeding religious extremists. Because of these religious schools, what we have today, a lot of Malay kids, they go in, they want to go to study in university. Everything else is filled up with quotas, but no, you've got Islamic studies. Great. You graduate with Islamic studies. Is it the right form of Islam? What do you do with Islamic studies besides being an ustad or serving in jacket? You can't be an engineer. So, right now, as in back then, we still have inequality. Yesterday, I checked in the World Bank report that our Gini index is 48.6%. And that's quite high. We are more unequal than many, many developed nations. Actually, we're on par with the United States, but the United States is not the example of a very equal society. But there was a solution to all this. The solution was to balance and re-establish ties between the races. A return to understanding between each other, of tolerance. And this was the basic ethos and struggle of UMRO back then. UMRO now is a very unbalanced. That's a different story altogether. In fact, now, there's a call for intellectual and moderate Malays to speak out against injustice. Like my grandfather, I find this method ineffective. As intellectuals speak on a field that only intellectuals understand. What needs to be done is we need to go out into the rural areas, into the hinterland. Some people think the hinterland, the rural areas, are full of hicks, uneducated Malays. No, that's wrong. What we need to do is we need to go out there, not as a Malay, not only as a Chinese, not only as Indians. We need to go out there and tell them, show them that, look, you can aspire to something. You don't need to be in Islam. Yes, religion is personal. You need a solid foundation. The foundations not only come from school, but they come from at home. What's happening now is a reflection of what society has come to. A society where everyone is chasing riches, but our poor being is rotten. I mean, let's take a look at KL today. It rains. On a normal day, it'll take me 15 minutes from my house to go to Sungai Besito. Today it took me 1 hour? 1 hour. We have a thing called the smart tunnel. It's not really smart, I mean, jams up everywhere. But this is the thing. Our mentality, like our sewage system in KL, is still stuck in the 70s. I mean, something needs to be done. And sometimes I'm compelled to ask, what is a Malay? I mean, there are names being thrown: moderate Malay, liberal Malay, Islamic Malay, you know, everything. But does it make me less of a Malay because I'm considered moderate? That I like to have a balanced view of things? Was it because I'm foreign educated and my Malay is very, very basic? Or is it because I'm Muslim, I'm progressive, who freely mixes with the other ethnicities? Now, freedom is something people always misunderstand and abuse. You've got monkeys like Ismail Putasa running out there, running rampant, saying all sorts of things. They defile our federal constitution, they insult fellow Malaysians. Malaysians who were born here. I mean, people call Chinese and Indians Tibetan. But what about people like, say, in Malacca, who've been here since the 15th century? Are they Tibetan? No. But why is our government allowing these forms of hatred? Is it because they're inept? Is it because they're stupid? Is it because they don't know what to do? You know, in all fairness, I think the government are smart. But it's their ego that has separated them from the people. The people are crying, people are complaining. Back then, 1969, May 13th, Tun Dr Ismail, listened to the people. They knew what they wanted. We had leaders who freely mixed with other races, understood each other. Now, what we have are a bunch of ministers that, because the party wants to have Malay rights because of inequality, they go out there and they shout, yes, you know what, yeah, I've got Chinese friends at home, but you know what, Ketua Melayu. It doesn't work. Because the more insular any community becomes, the more of inequality will rise. Let's take a look for the Chinese. So Malay, Chinese is Chinese. But if you look deeper and you understand the Chinese, you've got the Hokkiens, you've got the Fuchals, you've got the Cantonese, you've got all the other clans. And most of the time, these clans will never work with each other. Am I correct? there's a unification. I mean, they are unified in one thing: make money. They don't care about power. They care about themselves, their future, and the future of the children. Education, have a good life. Henceforth, I think what needs to happen now is Malaysia needs a figure like Tun Dr Ismail, that transcends racial politics to truly unite this beautiful and multicultural nation. I mean, we have to remember, before the United States, the United States actually became free and multiracial during the 60s, after the Civil Rights Movement. Before that, they had their form of apartheid. Before South Africa, Malaysia, we had Malaysia. Malaysia was there since 1957. We were already united. We just respected each other and we worked together. I mean, this is the beauty about Tun Dr Mahathir's Vision 2020. He managed to mask everything in a common direction. Let's make money. Look East policy. Everyone just wanted to make money. And the fruits of their labors actually bore fruit. People became rich. But what people did not realize back then is we were moving forward in such a pace that we forgot ourselves. We forgot what the essence of being Malaysian was. We forgot about respect. We forgot about how to interact with each other, how to learn from each other. And like in KL right now, sometimes in the poor urban areas, you will see a Malay area, a Chinese area, an Indian area, all next to each other, separated by a street. But they'll never mix. Because polarization has happened so much in the schools that's affected them personally. And how do we go about doing that? I mean, people talk about NEP. NEP is to elevate Malays. I, for one, and my parents never benefited from the NEP. We never asked a single cent from the government because Tun Dr Ismail, my grandfather, stated, the government is not your piggy bank. It's not an ATM machine where we can just go there, put in a card, ask for money. We had to work hard ourselves. So in that regards, the NEP has been abused, but to get rid of it, just like that, would just cause so much chaos because Malays are still insecure. I mean, inequality between the richest Malay and the poorest Malay is very, very high. The Malay middle class is shrinking. And they're either getting richer or poorer. The top 1% getting richer and richer and richer every day. They don't care what happens to their fellow Malays. They can talk about Islam all they want. Islam is not a unification factor. Malay supremacy is not a unification factor. But what we could do is, we can start, advocate, talk about it. Let's say, okay, NEP goes back to the basics. We help the poor. Those that have money, you can get it. You just can't have a piece of NEP. The pie is not big enough. The pie is meant for the poor. We need to help them. But at the same time, we need to help the poor of other races. The Indians. Many Indians are still poor, still living in the plantations. We need to help them. So what we need to do is, we need to have a mirror NEP as a suggestion to help them. At the same time, pairing with NEP. And institutions like MARA, UITN, they need to develop progressive and forward-looking Malay community. And it's via actions. We need to go back to inspiring people. Inspire them to work harder and they'll be rich. Actually, it's not about being rich, it's about being comfortable. It's all about moderation. What we also need to do is, I think, the public service sector. Fully out of topic, Tun Dr Mahathir, prime example. When he was Minister of Education, the first thing he did was he realized that the civil service was inept and inefficient. He went there 7 o'clock in the morning and he timed every single one of them what time they came in. And he realized people came in and had a laissez-faire attitude and wanted to fight. What was. So he revamped things. But how many Tun Dr Mahathis are there? Ministers now just going out, rather than fixing the ministry, they're going out in public talking nonsense. All about the ego. Fix the ministries first. That's why now what we have in ministries, there are silos and islands amongst themselves. They don't even respect the minister. But advocating for an inclusive society does not restrict itself to ethnicity and creed. What we also need to look at is we need to elevate, women and the youth. Women, why? Because women, as part of Malay culture, were out there on the fields working. Yet what we have is Islamic fascists coming in and saying, no, women, go what? Stay at home. I mean, today there was someone advocating rape in marriage. Totally nonsense. But Islam empowers women, especially Surah An-Nisa. It gives women special status. Women are allowed to work. Women cannot be the breadwinner. The breadwinner has to be the man. But that's another topic on its own. The youth. We just can't silence the youth. The more you suppress them, the more you silence them, the more they're going to get angry. The more angry they get, the fires are going to burn. And this is what's happening out there today. That angry youth. People talk about the Chinese tsunami. There was no such thing as the Chinese tsunami. The Chinese tsunami happened because the Chinese saw UMNO being insular and not helping Malaysians, but helping the Malays. But what also happened was the youth. The youth were angry. They did not believe that the government of the day would empower them in the future. We have many unemployed youth. In fact, the youth today, I find very egotistical. They're all about themselves. They're always right, you are wrong, and they'll never, ever stick to a job more than 4 months. It's ridiculous. But it goes back to our value systems and the leadership. But Tun Dr Ismail lives in every single one of us. Whether it be Malay, Chinese, Indian, or in Orang Asli. What we need strong principles within us. And we should not allow our children to grow up with hate and a lack of knowledge. For the ignorant Malaysian will be the ultimate downfall and detriment to the nation that we love. I would like to finish off with Tun Dr Ismail's dear friend, Robert Kwok, who had this to say about his best friend. In my opinion, he, Tun Dr Ismail, was probably the most non-racial, non-racist Malay I have met in my life. And I have met a very wide range of Malays from all parts of Malaysia. Doc was a stickler for total fair play, for correctness, a total anathema to him to be anything else. Every Malay colleague feared him because of this, including Mahathir. So thank you all very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Tariq. Yeah. That was very illuminating and interesting talk.
Thank you, thank you.
And I'm sure a number of people would like to get more information
Huh? Mostly.
Rosely.
No, Colin.
Colin. Word itself.
No, no.
No.
If Hamin Deros asked, yeah, I don't know what his cake was. He didn't like cake. Yeah. Pardon? He actually knew he had a heart attack when he first resigned from government in 1967. So he would have been 52. He died 72, 22, 15, 57. 57, young man.
Papers of Tun Dr Ismail are now into the topic of Singapore.
Yes. Yes.
I think that it is not a bit of a statement as to how I think here in the country. In that the family would want to have papers there than here.
Okay, that's very interesting that you brought that up. When Tun Dr Ismail passed away, immediately after his funeral, a special branch came to the house and ransacked the house, looking for vital pieces of information pertaining to Tun Razak and leukemia. But I believe there was something else there, and I've read parts of the memoir, and it gives a different view of history. And it was always kept up in my grandmother's room at the attic. And when my Uncle Tawfiq decided to write a book, he knew that A, the archives were inefficient in keeping and storing any historical items. I mean, I think back then it was 2002, there was a flood in the archives and a lot of things were destroyed, including some of P.Ramlee's most famous films. There was only one copy. So he took it to Singapore ICS, and yes, it is a travesty. But I believe if they had given it to the government, the true story of 1969 would have just disappeared. So I think my uncle did the right thing. It's not seditious. It just gives a true outline of what happened back then. I mean, it was the rise of the right wing. But it's kept perfectly there, and in fact there's a new book coming out soon by Ricky Bay. It's about how involved he was in UMNO and more details. But I will announce it in MAHC when that book launches. Anything else?
I was wondering, like, if your grandfather was still around, what would he do? What would he say? With regards to current events,
If he was alive.
yeah.
No.
I mean, like, any his course of action, what would he do to rectify the whole situation?
Mahathir wouldn't be around. I don't think Najib would be either. Luck would definitely be there. No. Okay, let's take a look at Tun Dr Ismail now. I mean, if he was here now, right? He would have actually told off UMNO first. He would have said to UMNO, look, you can't go around acting like baboons and preaching for an insular society. With regards to the rise of the Islamic right, my grandfather always believed that Islam was about moderation. It's not about your outwardly appearances or what you say, it's about how you act, how you interact with other people. It's not between Muslim and Muslim, it's about how we treat other races, other religions. And I think our education policy, if he was around, would have changed into a more open education policy in terms of teaching children and kids about analytical skills. Because right now I think we have products where they come out in a very, very textbook. And ISA would probably still be around, but used not for political, but more for terrorism, extremism. I mean, what we're saying now. The police force, I believe, would actually be more of a proper police force rather than a political force or showing power. We won't have 200,000 people wasting their time watching Twitter. They actually go out there and look for real criminals. I mean, I think recently yesterday there was a beheading in Club, which is not reported.
So in regards to how handle 69, right? All these immediate course of action you have to handle the current situation.
In fact, if he was around, I don't think the current situation would have happened. But something else would have. And you have to understand that back then, him, Dr. Ismail and Kung Fu were the only ones that were actually moderate and progressive. I mean, you have to understand from that era onwards. I mean, you had Tun Mahathir, Tun Musa, Dato' Harun, Gaffer Baba. These are all the right wingers. So the UMNO at that particular time was very, very right wing, and it still is today. But UMNO, I think, would have had 3 elections. As in, membership would have probably been, closed to maybe 500,000, and UMNO will definitely not be in business, because he had this to say, and it still rings true down to my generation. If you want to be in business, be in business. If you want to go into politics, but make sure you earn money first. So we would have a very, very different outlook.
So in general, it means that back then what makes it work is that they have like a group of progressives in UMNO.
Yeah, the group of progressives, and not only that, I think communication. I don't think back then they would tell MCA off, look, you are being chauvinistic. You can't just suddenly advocate, to try and get rid of Article 153, but there was always compromise. The problem now is that the Prime Minister is quiet. He doesn't answer anything. So people are wondering if there's any leadership. To be a true leader, to exude leadership, you've got to talk to people, you've got to understand people. And I think if Dr. Ismail was alive today, and he was in power, there'll be a fine line between business and politics. Because this is what's happening now. It's when business comes into politics, everything becomes a business. I mean, if we look at extremism today, it actually benefits the business. Land prices go down. business come in, wallop it up. And then you want to make sure that your ketua bahagian or your UMNO members earn a bit of money. What do? You sell an Islamic product. You brand it Islamic product. You brand it a Malay product. So only Malays will buy it. But the problem is, trickle down economics does not work. It never works. It only benefits the top. And we are, it's like suggesting that UMNO is almost a multi-level marketing company. The top get rich, everyone comes in, you pay your 5,000 whatever membership, and you make money too. That's what initially it is. UMNO now, you don't have people that go into politics for the sake of the people. They go in there just to make money. I mean, we look at the opposition. The opposition, they have no money, little money, but they go in there for the passion. But the problem is they're being drowned out by UMNO. And the opposition is also rudderless. It is leaderless. They don't have basic policies. Does that answer your question? It's a very hypothetical question, and I'm worried that such a bunch is going to come in. But it would have been a very different Malaysia, I can tell you that. And it's all about ethics and doing the right thing. Because like that, he knew that between Chinese and Malays, the Malays are always going to feel insecure. So how do we get the Malays to feel less insecure? That's the outcome problem. UMNO's answer now is religion. It's not. We just need to make. There should be David Woolman.
Correct. Who are my closest friends in community or outside of government? They exchange correspondence or taking notes among them?
Funny enough, he was very close to Robert Kwok, Eileen Chua's brother, what's his name? Leslie Chua. He was very close to the Putuchari family of Singapore now. He was close to the Razaks. He actually had a wide range of friends, and but he was more of a family man. He just preferred to stay at home, stay with my grandmother, go on their trips to Japan. But if I were to read and all that, I mean, he had Malay friends, he had Indian friends, he had Chinese friends. But never, only Robert Kwok, I would say.
What would he do in conserving heritage and history? He's around.
He locked up Amin Deros first. No, I think he would have conserved it. I mean, what's happening in KL, the Bok House? Bok House would not have happened. What they did to Bok House. He was a very, from what I see from his private collections, he was a very sentimental man. He knew that heritage would always help the person or the community. And I think that's what's happening now. I mean, when I was young, ever since I was young, I went to English school and all that, but we never forgot our Malay heritage. Because my grandfather, I think heritage was more in terms of food. I mean, really, Johorians are weird. I'm Johorian, but we're the best. But, for example, breakfast. I've never tried this, I'll never intend to try it. His favorite breakfast meal was roti canai, topped with durian, sprinkled with the ideal milk, was it? Yeah, condensed milk. Yeah. That's first breakfast. Second breakfast, then you have your mee rebus. Yeah, and then sometimes maybe lunch satay or tea time satay. He, because I think it's only during the 80s that people actually forgot about heritage. They just saw a piece of land. Like my great grandfather's house was on a hill, but the family just lived around it, and I think there were about 2 or 3 houses in the compound. It's where the Johorian Pusat Islam is now. That whole area was my great grandfather's house, and my grandfather, he was flamboyant in terms of how he wore his clothes, but when it came to housing, I think he really, really, really liked the old British colonial house. I mean, like if I were to remember my house where I grew up, it was your English architecture from 1930s. It wasn't your typical 1960s architecture, all the Art Deco and whatnot. But I'm pretty sure that it's still legislation that, look, we need to be proud of our heritage, we need to be proud of history, we need to learn from history. And our museum wouldn't be what it is now. It would be a bigger museum.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Tariq, could you recall what were your grandfather's advice to you? Or can you reflect what
No, I've never met him. Yeah, never met him.
it's just to your mother?
It's to my mother, my uncles, and my grandmother.
And what have they told his advice? How do you think that his
Well,
grandchildren
I remember that they said, I remember for a time I wanted to join UMNO, and my grandmother said, don't join UMNO. Don't join UMNO, don't join UMNO, don't join UMNO. Every time she would say that, I said, why? It's not what your grandfather joined. It's a totally different thing. And my grandfather always said, make money first, be a specialist in something. Then if you want to go into politics, because if it doesn't work out, you have something to fall back into. So politics to him was not a means to make money, it was not a means for an end, but it was more to help the people. And he would just basically don't lie to him as well. He really, really, really hated liars.
Thank you. And in moving forward, how shall we go about the country now?
Well, I think people should start talking to each other. We need to engage, we need to learn. We should know what is sensitive, what is not sensitive. Religion is always going to be a sensitive and personal issue, and I think right now we just need to move away from that. But somehow or other, there are always idiots that bring religion back into the fore for discussion. Because I think for 3 months we didn't hear anything about religion, and all of a sudden the cross happened. I mean, there's somehow or other. People just need to talk, need to engage. Shouldn't worry whether they eat in a halal restaurant or not. Just shouldn't worry. Religion is personal. And I think that's how we need to move forward. And I think another way is we need to understand what is it start making people angry. I mean, right now, what we have are the government apologists saying, oh, our economy is going forward. But inequality is rising. You can see that. I mean, GST doesn't help anything. I mean, with what I earn, I don't mind paying GST. But I've heard complaints from the roadside seller that they are charging GST because the suppliers are charging GST. I mean, how they implemented was probably the wrong thing. They should have just said, okay, you know what, goods above this price, GST, but we'll have a gradual GST. Because everyone's suffering from it. Yeah, it's crazy. They should tax beer more.
So I guess for in here, what advice do you have for each and every one of us and for our own community and what we need to do within our own community?
Well, my parting advice to everyone, I think we should just work together, talk to each other, you know, find that spirit of Muhibah once again. I'm not Hey, last time I'm gonna give Hudud, you know. No, but yes, what David Wu said, yes, I mean, we need to tell people we are friends, we're not your enemy, we're not gonna take a piece of the pie. And we should just stop being jealous of each other. But I think it's the young, I mean the 30-year-olds and below are just completely out to find their way and they'll do it their way. So I think it's just causing an imbalance. So we just need to find some form of balance, and I think legislations need to be introduced, especially in terms of racial inequality. How do we address that? Our education system. What about our teachers? Our police force. I mean, so the basic pay for a constable is 800 ringgit. Are you surprised that they're corrupt? No. In the top we're getting rich, everyone down there is not. And our civil service, we need to tell them to be more efficient. We just can't have this laissez-faire attitude anymore. We just need to find what is it that makes us Malaysians. We don't have to emulate Singapore, we don't have to emulate Indonesia, we don't have to emulate the United Kingdom, we don't have to emulate Saudi Arabia or America. We find what's our strength. I mean, like the Japanese. They succeeded because they're Japanese. Same thing with the Chinese in China. They succeeded because they knew what it meant to be China. We are trying to emulate everybody, but we're not us. So we just need to find out again. Anything else, anyone?
I think it's been a very interesting question and answer session, but so we'll just end up and I'd like to thank you again.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody.